But we'll start with the foundational question of what is money in this first episode here. So, in making my Bitcoin for Grandpa series, which I need to pick back up again and keep it going. I got through seven, eight episodes, I believe, on Instagram. You could go watch. But even talking to my grandpa and trying to get him to understand this is where I started, because you really, if you don't know, or if you can't see clearly how the current system works, it's hard to understand why Bitcoin is necessary, what problems it solves. Like, who cares, basically? Like, we already have this money here. Why do we need a new one? And so you have to understand foundationally what money is and how our current system operates to be able to then see the clear differences in fiat money versus Bitcoin. And then the light bulb kind of goes off and you're like, oh, like, it is a way better form of money. So let's just start there. What is money? How would you approach answering that question if somebody were to ask?
Yeah. I mean, I'd take the step back too, I know we're kind of saying that with what you're saying, that what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is money. That's what we're saying. And Bitcoin isn't just money. Bitcoin is actually an entire monetary system, and it's an alternative monetary system. And what I mean by that is we have a fiat Keynesian model in monetary system right now. Bitcoin is not that. It's not fiat. Well, we certainly can get into that. And it's definitely more an Austrian economic model than a Keynesian model, which, again, things for another day. But that's fundamentally what Bitcoin is. The reason we start with what is money is because Bitcoin is money. And it's not just money. It's an entire framework or an entire system of how money can be used and moved and whatever else. But, to get to the point of, what's money? Well, money, at the very base level to me, is a communication network. It's how we communicate value, right? So what does that mean? That means, well, I go to the store and I want to get a steak for dinner. Well, actually, let's take it back. I'm looking at steak and I'm looking at chicken. All right. Well, steak costs $20 for a steak. Chicken costs $10 for chicken, right? That means that, okay, I have to value the steak more than I have to value the chicken, because if I value them equally, then I'm just going to go with the chicken because it costs less, right? So there's a reason the steak costs more. And so that's what money does, is it effectively helps us establish how we communicate value, right? And that's not just going to the store and buying things. That's for any good and service that you go out and buy. You have to feel that you are getting value enough for whatever you're spending your hard-earned money on to justify whatever that price is. So it's the way that we do that, and it's always been that way. It's just more clear today than what it used to be. Money, the forms of money, we originate with barter, right? So money historically took root was in a barter society. I'd trade my cow for your 20 baskets of apples, right? That works fine when it's just me and you and a couple neighbors, right? Okay, cool. You can have your apples, I can have my cows, neighbor can have their pigs, the other one can have their goats. We can all kind of trade and say, yep, I want to give away one of my calves because I want some apples, or I want some goats, or I want some pigs, and you can do the same thing. That doesn't work in a globally connected world, right? I can't go to the person in Mexico and do the same thing. I mean, I could, but it's just, now I got to drive there. Now I got to get the cattle there. Somehow got to get the goods back. How am I able to know that, yes, these goods down there are actually, just as well produced as what they are up here, so I know that it's good? It doesn't work on a global scale. So you start with barter, and then what you really see with money then is money developed from a barter society because of the need of a growing and expanding use of what it means to kind of communicate value, right? Once we're working outside of just our tribe or just our, close group of people, now we're working in cities, now we're working, multiple cities, now we're trading across countries. Okay, we need to have some sort of common thing that we can use to be able to communicate that value. And so that's what money is.
For sure. And where the barter system runs into problems is, yes, okay, now we have the kind of physical distance between the people that I want to trade with, and why we even have to go outside of our immediate kind of community is because of, let's say that I am an apple, I got an orchard out back and you do have cows and you're producing milk, you know, and you are allergic to apples. Let's say you're the only milk dairy farmer in our community and you're allergic to apples and you do not want apples, never will. You hate them. I'm never going to be able to get milk from you because I'm the apple guy. Like, I would have to then go find somebody who has something that you want, but also wants apples. It's like, okay, I got to find this person that wants my apples and I'm able to trade my apples with them for something that you want. And now you get into this huge problem of you're going to have to spend your entire time trying to just match up the dots of, okay, how can I get my way to something that I have that you value and you'll give me the milk. And so, like as you were saying, where money comes in is it allows me to then trade with you, even if you don't give a shit about my apples. You will take the money because you can use the money then to trade for something else with someone else. So it kind of fixes that friction, I guess, of not being able to barter with people who don't have what you want or need or don't care to trade with you. And so then we
I
get
think there's a
into.
fundamental. Sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's a fundamental piece of the barter thing too, where yes, barter is ineffective value communication. Money is a more effective value communication. But the other piece of what, and you can see this more with barter than you can with, you still can with money today, don't get me wrong, but it's easier to see with barter, is you had to put your time and effort into whatever those goods are. So for me to raise those cows or you to raise those apples, right? How much time did it take you? How much care of your orchard did it take you? Same for me and my cows. How much, that was my livelihood. So it was likely, a lot of my time. And so that's where, money, it's not communicating value. It's all also somewhat representative of our energy, right? Because we're expending our time on this earth, our finite time, to go and do something. So that is something we're utilizing our energy to go and do that. And that's where,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yes, money, is what allows us to communicate value, but it's also representative of the energy that we expend to go and do things. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
especially in today's society, when you can get so stinking specialized, like it's not like everybody's energy is equally necessarily valued. That's kind of where the public market comes in. Some people's, what they do is more valued, so they receive more for that. Now, it's also been perverted, later episodes,
Yeah.
perverted by our current financial system, that you can kind of game the system, and even though you're not providing value, still somehow not create but gain immense wealth. But that's why at a fundamental level with a barter, that's why I think it's important to understand too. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you're spending time on these things. So it's not just, oh, I'm communicating value. It's also, oh, I'm effectively making a decision on how my energy is best well to be utilized elsewhere in my life outside of what maybe my day-to-day is.
Yeah. Yeah. You're putting in that work and time to add value, to be able to add enough value to someone else that they're willing to, you know, part with their resources to take yours. Um,
Wait, are you saying
so,
it's proof of work? Is that what
yeah, that's not for this conversation. Um,
I'm
so so let's go into then, okay, the different forms of money that we kind of landed on as a society. First, there were a bunch of different forms of money that we won't go into prior to gold. We'll start with gold. We'll compare it to what we have today, and we'll also compare it to Bitcoin, and just the different properties and functions of money in a society. um, we'll kind of talk through why society landed on gold outside, after going through a bunch of other things. And it's because gold meets these properties fairly well, but not well enough to be continued to use as money today, which we'll get into. So yeah, so let's start there. So there's really, in a society there, or before we put in the society piece, when we just have like different items, I guess you could say. Like, we have gold, we have our paper dollar bills, and we have Bitcoin. And if we're trying to evaluate whether or not gold is good to be used as money, we have to compare it against 5, 6, you could say 8. You said there's 8 in some resources, but you have to compare it against the different resources against the 5 properties or 6 properties that we'll go over here, that make a good money, that make a good form of money. And so the first one that we can start with is portability. So money, essentially what that means is we have to be able to transport our money from one location to another. If I cannot transport my money easily, then it's hard for me to be able to go from, my house here to maybe the other state or another country or wherever. If I can't transport my money very easily, then it's not a good form of money. And this was actually one of the major downfalls of gold specifically, because it is so heavy. It's hard to be able to transport across large distances. And if you were trying to carry a large amount of gold and you had to do it for a very long, trek to another country, another town, whatever, you have to make sure that it's secure, because if somebody, if you're just walking along with a massive bag of gold, it's going to be super heavy. You probably won't be able to do it in the first place. But then, what's to stop 3 dudes from tag teaming you and taking your gold? And so that the portability of money is something that is important for it to be a good form of money in a society. And so that's gold. You can speak to Bitcoin and dollars that we have today on the portability aspect specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's an important emphasis on this too when we're talking through these kind of attributes. Is this these attributes are describing why why a good was chosen to be money, right? Like I think that's fundamental to this. Is like, okay, we just kind of skipped over all these other forms of money and went straight to gold. That's fine, but like the premise of this is that gold was chosen as a money because it had certain attributes. It wasn't something that's just like, oh, we just kind of all accept this as money, or oh, it's just it's just money just because. Like no, these attributes are what made it desirable as a form of desirable to use as a form of money.
Good point.
And so with the portability thing though, really what it gets to, like you're saying, okay, gold kind of hard to take across space and time. What is extremely portable in today's society is something that's attached to the internet, and that's what we have both with dollars and with Bitcoin, right? Because now, we can go into the semantics. I don't think I'm gonna do that, but basically, what you have, whether it's fiat currency in dollars or it's Bitcoin, is you have a money that you can pretty much take with you anywhere across the world in any amount. And there's no, you're not carrying a huge bag. You're not, there's no necessarily real physical risks, kind of like you're talking about from that standpoint that, oh, I've got a big bag I'm carrying around and I can't get it there. No, it's purely digital. And sure, you could say with, fiat currency, well, but there's physical dollar bills. And it's like, okay, sure, yeah. If you want to use dollar bills, that's fine. The only people that are carrying large amounts of dollar bills in physical currency are probably not people who are good actors, at least in my estimation, for the most part. If you're trying to get hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars moved in physical money, yeah. It's something to think about. So neither here nor there when we think about the digital dollar, and then we think about Bitcoin. It's the same thing. It's ultra portable. Can take anywhere, can spend basically when and where we want. We'll talk about that specifically, how that mechanism will work. But if we want to, we can take it anywhere and everywhere, I should say. Which is why those are a better form than what gold is, right? Because again, gold is not portable. We can't really do that very easily. Bitcoin and dollars are very portable. We can do that very easily. So they're very good at that.
Yeah. And we can also talk about the expense of transporting your money to a different place. Gold is going to be very expensive to move because it is heavy and it needs to be secure, et cetera, et cetera. Dollars is not very expensive to move across various distances, and Bitcoin is even cheaper than dollars to move, across physical space. The one thing I would like to talk about with portability, though, specifically to dollars, I mean, you said it's connected to the internet. or both Bitcoin and dollars are connected to the internet, but we run into an issue of the banks and Federal Reserve having to approve of us sending our money to a different location. And so there are limitations on the portability of US dollars if the people in charge say, no, you can't send money to that person or that country or to buy whatever XYZ it is that you want to buy. So there are those limitations on portability in that way that are downsides, to say it lightly, of our current US dollar system. Could you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's kind of interesting too when you get into that whole phenomena is so, yeah, okay, we maybe we can't take dollars, across the world. To me, I think there's still an argument to be made that if you have your phone and you can connect to your bank account, if I'm in Switzerland overseas, like I can
Mm-hmm.
still log into my phone and I still can have my money, right? Okay, maybe my government says that I can't get that money out of my bank account, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there is this like, okay, is it really mine? Can I really access it? But I think what's interesting about this aspect too is, when we talk about money as a value communication network,
Mm-hmm.
um, what you get to is what we have today is we actually have multiple value communication networks, right? Each individual currency is its own value communication networks. This is why we have foreign exchange, right? This is why $1 doesn't equal €1, doesn't equal one Swiss franc, doesn't equal one Japanese yen. They're all different. They all exchange for different rates. So we actually have
Mm-hmm.
multiple different value communication networks, and this isn't necessarily tied directly to portability. But with Bitcoin, this is part of the benefit of it is instead of having, if we use like the developed world, maybe there's 20 fiat currencies, 25. Instead of, and outside of that, obviously
Mm-hmm.
many more. So maybe there's hundreds of fiat currencies in the world. Instead of having at the very least 20 to 25, at the very most hundreds of different value communication networks, Bitcoin as a money allows us to have one. And you could still say, well, there could be a future where Bitcoin is just kind of the backing money, and you're still using your local dollars, yen, whatever else. But the premise is that those always are going to tie back then to Bitcoin versus them exchanging to themselves. Bitcoin is acting as the base layer money.
Mm-hmm.
That's an aside. The portability aspect, yes, it definitely is harder to get those, and to this exchange rate thing. Even if you can get that, use that money in that foreign country, you're still not going to be able to use it in necessarily the amounts that you can, right? So like my $1, or let's say my $100, I can go to the store here, and that gets me, groceries for the week. Well, maybe if I'm in Switzerland and I try to do the same thing because of the conversion rate and because the currency has different value over there, maybe that only gets me half a week's worth of groceries. Maybe I go somewhere in South
Well,
America. Good.
I mean, I see what you're saying with the exchange rate, but I think we should more so speak to the kind of freedom to be able to use your money in the way and to do what you want with it. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, we have the differences in values between different currencies, which is a whole headache in and of itself. But I think the freedom is the biggest thing that is important to point out here when it comes to just being able to move your money wherever you want.
So I mean that speaks to, and then this to me I suppose is probably a future conversation one of the day. I think that just speaks to Bitcoin being a decentralized monetary network versus centralized monetary networks is
Mm-hmm.
really what that gets to. Bitcoin, by being decentralized, by having no central point of authority that can tell you yes or no, you can't spend your money here or there, like we have with fiat money, then yes, that
Mm-hmm.
allows for that portability to be more. And that's the
Yep.
great thing about Bitcoin is that it is decentralized, and we can actually, I'm running my own node in my, right 2 feet from my desk here. That node is how I can communicate where I want my money to go on the Bitcoin network. I don't have to have my bank to be able to communicate that. I don't have to have my
Mm-hmm.
bank that talks to the Federal Reserve, FedWire, all that other sort of stuff. So that
Yeah.
speaks to that. We can speak more of the details in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we'll get into kind of what that means for it to be decentralized, but I think the biggest risk to people when it comes to portability in our current financial system is and this will continue to get worse, is basically censorship. So, okay, right now, as of right now, just to use your example, if you went over to Switzerland and you tried to spend $2,000 on one purchase, they're probably going to freeze your account. And yeah, you may be able to call them and get it unfrozen and whatever, but there's a chance you wouldn't be able to. Especially if you're going to the Middle East or Africa or something like that, and you're trying to spend $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 in one transaction, they're just not going to let you do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it's for. It doesn't matter who it's going to. You could be donating to a mission organization over there that's spreading Jesus and building churches, and they just don't care because it's located in the Middle East. And so you're cutting off portions of the world and portions of the world from the financial system, which basically destroys their society and their ability to trade back and forth. And even here in the United States, we saw it in 2020, 2021, and I think this is what kind of opened a lot of people's eyes and made them land on Bitcoin as like, oh, this is why we actually do need Bitcoin, is because if you had certain political views, or if you were maybe anti-vax, or whatever you want to say, you could get your bank account frozen, or the bank could just say, hey, you're no longer a customer here. You have a week to move it, to move it somewhere else. And imagine if, okay, now the big banks work together, and you can no longer be a customer of any of these banks simply because of your views, the thoughts that you have, or whatever it may be. And so, yeah, it's not necessarily something that hinders us on a daily basis right now, most of our American society, but we've seen it in other third world countries destroy their society. Yeah, I mean, okay. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be third world. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, Canada, where they were having those protests. I can't even remember all the details of it, but you couldn't donate to their cause or whatever. They cut off all of them from the banking system. That's an example of, you don't have the freedom that you think you do to be able to do what you want with your money. And that's all that we're really trying to drive home with this is, yeah, okay, it may not affect you now, but 5 years from now, when you're trying to send 10 grand to that, to use the mission trip example, to that organization who's building a church down in Haiti, if the Federal Reserve doesn't want you to do that, you're not doing it. You're just not doing it. Doesn't matter. Unless you want to, again, get cash out, and they will only let you take a certain amount of cash. So you have to be under the limits on a daily basis or weekly basis or monthly basis. And then you got to fly it down there. And, with Bitcoin, you could just do it. They could have the money in 30 minutes with less fees than you would pay in the traditional financial system. And then they can go about their operation, whatever they're doing. Yeah, I mean, we thought we were going to.
The last thing I'd say with the portability, and I mean, I actually didn't think there was just much to talk about with it, but we get going. It's like, what this kind of ties into too is, okay, so we have gold and we have fiat currency. Like, how did we get from there to here? Portability is the main reason. There's others too, certainly. But portability is really the biggest reason, because we needed something that we could easily take with us across distance and time. And that's where, banknotes originally came from. Banknotes were kind of the first iteration of what turned into fiat currency. Banknotes were just basically a ledger that said, hey, Jacob owns this much gold in his account. And then you could kind of basically just put a ledger on that across time. Right. So this basically how we get to fiat currency is because gold didn't work very well as that. And there's kind of these iterations on what that looked like across time, to the point where, in 1972, that's when it went off the gold standard. Up until that, dollars had even been tied to a specific amount of gold. After that, it was just the full faith and credit of the United States government, which is fine when you have a lot of faith in that, but when you don't, that makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah, nobody should. Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point to make, because which we can lead into the next kind of quality or attribute of a good money for society is divisibility. You were talking to the point of portability being a reason why, okay, I'll allow you to secure my gold. You give me these kind of paper IOUs that tell me how much gold I own, and then I can give that to someone else, and they could come and kind of withdraw my gold because I gave them the IOUs to trade, whatever. Divisibility is the other big attribute that kind of we ran into issues on. If you have a gold bar and you go to the grocery store and you only need a tenth of that gold bar, well, now you got to melt it down, reform it into the exact quantity that you need to be able to buy your groceries. And the last time I checked, there's no cashiers at Kroger melting down any gold. So that is the kind of, we'll just segue into the next one of divisibility. That's another problem with gold and why we had to kind of move on to something else that would work better in a society that is larger than the few people, like you mentioned before, especially globally. That gets into a whole nother scale or conversation. So divisibility is the second attribute after portability that is important for money to have, for it to function well in a society. So I spoke to the limitations with gold. You can speak to dollars and Bitcoin.
Yeah. And even with gold too, I mean, that's the reason why it's not just gold bars. You have gold coins too. Like that was the attempt at divisibility, and then they modulated divisibility by using other precious metals. That's why you had silver coins, copper coins. It was the same thing. It was a way to modulate divisibility, even though it wasn't a very good way. Again, that's where we got to, or how we got to where we are. But yeah, it's interesting because on the surface, so Bitcoin itself. Basically, what you have is, a lot of people just think, well, I just buy a Bitcoin, so I got to go and spend $60,000 and I get one Bitcoin out of it. But that's not the case. Bitcoin is actually highly, highly divisible. It's actually divisible to 8 decimal places. So what, I don't know, tens, hundreds, thousands. I don't know what comes after that. But like,
It's
you can
100,
get
100 million.
There you go. Thank you.
100
So
millionth.
1.0000000, right? Like that is the divisibility that we can get with Bitcoin. So you don't just have to buy one Bitcoin. You can buy 0.0000001, which might be, a couple cents or something like that in dollar terms. I don't know what that would be at that point. But when we talk about this divisibility aspect, because of that, Bitcoin is actually more divisible than what fiat currency is, because basically we can divide fiat currency down to the penny, right? So the hundredth, right? We don't have a thousandth. We don't have, the penny isn't worth $0.0001. And so Bitcoin actually improves upon the divisibility of dollars in that sense. And this isn't necessarily a strict pro or a strict con, but one potential benefit of that divisibility and Bitcoin being a digital asset instead of still, even though we talk about dollars in digital terms for the most part, physical currency still only has specific denominations, right? Like we have a penny, a dime, a nickel, a quarter, a dollar, a $10, $5, whatever, right? There's still specific denominations. With Bitcoin, we don't have that. Right, you can spend 0.00017432215, whatever, and so it actually allows for even more divisibility from that standpoint, because we can even get more granular with the divisibility. Now, you could say that's not actually a benefit because having those denominations is helpful, and there's certainly a case to be made for that. But at the end of the day, the ability is still there. I mean,
Right.
and again, the ability to divide or to have a divisible amount of Bitcoin is very, very easy. And even though it's 100 million or what you said place, there is actually theoretical abilities to go even beyond that if we would ever need it, right?
Yeah.
So one thing we haven't said already is that Bitcoin has 21 million Bitcoin total in the system. They're not all circulating right now. It's a topic for a different day, but 21 million total. So that makes for, I think, like 21 quadrillion individual units. So that 0.000 zeros and a 1, that's called a sat. So that makes, I think, for like 21 quadrillion or something like that sats, if we have 21 million Bitcoin. But you could theoretically say that you could just basically, if we needed to, which I don't know if we had ever would or not, but if we needed to, we could probably actually even divide those sats farther out. Like at the end of the day, all it is just adding more zeros on the back end. So it's kind of this ultimately divisible asset or ultimately divisible money versus fiat currency really being limited to the penny, which again, for most things is fine,
Mhm.
but it's just it's not
Well,
as good.
it's not necessarily like a divisibility is like, oh, this is a major problem with dollars, and we need something different. It's the other, things that we'll get into. Portability. We already spoke to the issues with the dollars and why Bitcoin is better. And there's other attributes that we'll get into that make Bitcoin better than the dollar. Divisibility is not really one of them, but I think the reason why we don't necessarily need anything less than a penny right now is because they just expand the supply, to an ever greater amount. So nothing's ever going to cost less than a penny. But when you have a fixed money supply, then your money actually becomes worth more over time, and that's why you may need to divide it out further into smaller units to be able to still transact, because I think that's a common maybe misconception or argument against Bitcoin is, oh, there's only 21 million that will ever be in existence. How is the whole world going to be able to use only 21 million? And it's like, well, that's because you can divide it out theoretically into an infinite amount. And that doesn't make more Bitcoin come into existence, which is another, I think, common misconception of like, okay, if I have this, I think pizza is what everyone loves to say. Like, if you divide a
Yeah.
pizza up into infinite slices, that doesn't mean you have infinite Bitcoin. You still only have that one pizza. And so you can just divide it into smaller and smaller units. And that's how we could use it at a larger scale, on a global scale, as an everyday money, if and even take it out further if we needed to. So that's not a limitation that you, person listening, needs to be worried about, basically. And I hope that I know there's still people out there that will probably say that against Bitcoin, but I don't know how people still stick with those kind of arguments. Um, so let's move then. So we have portability, divisibility. Let's move on to fungibility. I think is a good one to segue into next. Which fungibility, in the most simple terms, really means that if we just use dollars for example, my dollar is the same as your dollar. We need the units to be the same in order for us to be able to transact. And fungibility of gold, I think there was actually some issues because you can have counterfeiting and all of that stuff, and it may be hard to, you may have to weigh out your gold to even see if it's the same, and whatever. So if you don't have uniform units, it's hard to be able to transact back and forth with other people. So yeah, feel free to run with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I just saw something with the Olympics being here last couple of weeks. All the pictures, people biting the medals, right?
Yeah.
And it's like nobody really knows what that actually comes from. And it comes from that was actually a test to see if you had actual gold or not, because
Mm.
pure gold is actually slightly malleable. Like, not like, oh, you can just do whatever you want with it. But supposedly, I've never tried it, but supposedly you could actually, by biting gold, you could tell, like, I guess maybe our teeth could put a little indent on it or something. And if
Mm.
it did that, then you knew it was more pure gold, versus if it didn't, then it's likely that it was fake gold of some sort. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, so that's something I learned. But so everybody, all the Olympians doing that, like nobody knows why they think it's cool, but that's where the origin of that come from. And I actually think gold is fairly fungible for the most part, because to me, I think the fungibility, yes, you got to worry about counterfeits somewhat, but it's fairly also, it's not necessarily easy from a time perspective, but it is easy to understand, hey, is this real or fake, or actual or fake gold? And fungibility to me even gets more to, okay, if we just think about the real stuff, like how equal are those units? Well, one ounce of gold is the same as any other ounce of gold, right? Disregard the fake stuff. 1 ounce of gold
Yeah.
is the same as another. And that's where it comes to, like, with dollars, because you can make the same argument with dollars. Is, well, dollars is not fungible at all, because we can just go, people have done it, right? Literally had printers that printed their own money, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, a lot of them got caught because it's fake money. And so you could make that same argument there, but I don't think that's the argument against fungibility of dollars. I think the argument against fungibility of dollars is more so from a physical perspective, that they degrade somewhat over time, right? So you put a
Mm.
dollar through a wash multiple times, it's going to be holy and whatever else. So that dollar actually might not be, there, like you take that to the grocery store, you might not be able to use it. The person like, this is literally, I can see through this. Like, I'm not going to actually have this or use this for your payment.
Mm.
And so it's less fungible because of that. And then even from the digital perspective, digital dollars, I think you can make an argument against fungibility there too, just from the standpoint of getting back to that kind of multiple fiat currencies type thing. So $1 isn't
Mm.
necessarily equal to every other fiat currency, but even above and
Yeah.
beyond that, back to being able to actually use that wherever you would like to use that. That's also not, maybe as easy to do versus then Bitcoin. Um, I think a lot of people will say, well, Bitcoin is basically perfectly fungible, and one
Yeah.
Bitcoin is always equal to one Bitcoin. That's kind of a meme in the space. And I do think that by and large, Bitcoin is more fungible than gold, or not more fungible, but as fungible as gold, and probably more fungible than fiat money. But where you can run into issues at a very high level is because Bitcoin is on a public ledger, on the blockchain, something we'll talk about a different day. Because it's public, that means we can actually track individual Bitcoins and where they've been across time. And so you can actually make an argument that that actually hurts fungibility of Bitcoin because, okay, let's say uh,
I'm with you.
that Bitcoin was used for illegal activities, right? So, or whatever the illegal activity was used for that. And then you had nothing to do with the illegal activity, but that Bitcoin, because again, this is on a public ledger, so we can see specifically where each coin went. You're 3 hops away, so that money has been sent 3 times, and now you've received that. You try and go maybe to let's say in a future scenario, you're going to spend that. Well, what if you can't spend that because now that but Bitcoin is blacklisted because three times ago that money that Bitcoin was sent, you're not it was used for illegal activities and they can see that because the blockchain is public. And so that's
Yeah.
where fungibility, can kind of be used against Bitcoin. That's a conversation for a whole nother day of why KYC is not necessarily the greatest thing ever, but also why no KYC kind of sucks because there's a blacklist there. But disregard those things. By and
Yeah.
large, one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, and that's how it is. Like there's no difference in the value of the A Bitcoin versus B Bitcoin versus all the rest of the alphabet there. And so Bitcoin, from a
Right.
fungibility perspective, when we talk about okay, if we're choosing money because it's fungible, because it's worth the same no matter what, Bitcoin is just as fungible as what gold is, which is, in my opinion, more fungible than what fiat currency is.
Yeah. Um, cool. Yeah, I think we can go ahead then and move on to durability is a good one, and we can talk about durability of value versus like physical durability, as well, going into both of those because I think people can kind of think of it each way. If we just think of physical durability, it's important for money to have physical durability just because like you said, okay, if the dollar goes into the wash, if it did actually get ripped up or whatever, then you can no longer use it. And that's one big reason why society as a whole chose gold in the first place is because it's the most durable out of all the precious metals. They knew that, okay, if I accept gold for the hard work that I've put into take care of this cow, milk it, and then I get gold for selling the milk. I will be able to hold on to that gold for as long as I need to into the future, and it won't degrade over time. If we just compare it to, let's say, raspberries is the one that I always like to say, because it seems like every time we get raspberries from the store, they're bad by the time you get home. Almost, they got mold on them, and no matter how hard you check at the store, they're going to have mold on them when you get home. So raspberries are a bad form of money because if I accepted raspberries for the hard work that I put in, but I have to go ahead and spend it immediately because they're going to be bad tomorrow, that's not a good form of money. And
Yeah.
then just to speak to the durability of fiat money and Bitcoin, if we just think about it physically, and then I'll let you speak to the value, the durability of the value. I mean, um, physically, fiat, we're pretty much entirely digital at this point. Like, we're not worried about it. Okay, yeah, if you did happen to tear up the dollar, whatever, whatever. Bitcoin, it is physically durable. It's entirely digital, and we can get into the security of it in a different conversation. But it is durable, over time because of the nature of it being digital. But the durability of the value of the currency is also something that I think is not. I think is important. But most people don't typically talk about it here when we're just thinking about the different properties of money. But I think it's important to speak to in this point. So durability essentially comes from the next quality, if you will, being scarcity. They kind of play hand in hand. If you want to think about the durability of the value, with gold, when we think about the durability of its value, it holds its value pretty well over time because the supply cannot be. There's a limited supply, essentially. About 2% more gold comes into existence every single year. And it takes a lot of time, energy, money, resources to be able to mine that gold. If there was a new method of mining gold, I guess that just made it fall from the sky and became an infinite amount, well, then it wouldn't hold its value very much. And then I'll let you speak to, the scarcity that kind of ties in with the durability of the dollar versus Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, even with gold, outside of the supply aspect of it, just from the fact that gold can be minted, melted down, minted, melted down, minted, melted down, and that really does not degrade the quality of the gold. That's ultimately where that ultimate durability comes from in gold, is that it doesn't degrade over time, even taking into those factors, or that degradation that happens over time. It is so minimal that it really doesn't affect the value of a gold. And so that's why you can have gold that was probably found, 2,000, 4,000, whatever years ago, still being used today. Now, we can't tell you, okay, sure, you could look at some coins or whatever, but like something that's been melted down and remade, like that durability is still there. And for me, I think that the durability of fiat currency, where that really gets to, is more so with the institutions that are backing those currencies, right? Because, the physical durability, like you said, it's not very good. When we even talk about the digital stuff, that's what it really gets to. I mean, that's literally what dollars say, right? It's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. So what is the durability of that as an institution? What's the durability of another fiat currency, backed by a different government, right? And so it's like, okay, well, that's where the equation gets a little bit more interesting to think about, because it's like, then it gets back again to this kind of trust and belief in that institution, and not just, it's not just United States, it's all governments around the world, because all governments are doing some form of fiat money. And some do back by gold still, like I think Switzerland does, but it's very far and few that actually do in any sort of substantial amount. And so that's where it does get interesting, is that, this is where, again, prior to 1972, it wasn't just, the durability actually wasn't just tied to the institutions themselves. It was tied to some sort of physical reality in gold. Now, as a minimal amount, right? Because just the amount of gold we held compared to the amount of dollars that were in circulation was minimal, but it still was tied to that. So that's where fiat currency used to have better durability, because it used to be, for the most part, even if it wasn't the fiat currency we know today, it used to be that most of those paper notes were backed fully by gold. Or if it wasn't fully, the reserve requirements, talk about a different time, those reserve requirements were quite high. And so most of that paper money was backed by it. So it was actually quite durable. Now, because all that's gone and because it's on the institutions themselves, fiat currency, the durability on that, okay, now how much do you believe and trust in these institutions? And then with Bitcoin,
that's fair. I hadn't really thought about it that way. We talk to the physical durability, and I think most people speak to that. But I mean, if the U.S. government becomes obsolete, then the U.S. dollar becomes obsolete, and that's interesting.
Doesn't make it very durable.
Right. But then when we get to Bitcoin, then you got to also be fair enough to say that, I'll let you get into it, but give the fair
Bitcoin
comparison
is as
here.
valuable. Bitcoin is as valuable as the network that secures it. Bitcoin is not as valuable, but is in this case as durable as the network that secures it. Because if the
Mm-hmm.
network security is gone, then Bitcoin no longer has any value. If it no longer has any value, then it's really not durable at the end of the day, right? And so this
Yep.
is where that digital physical barrier gets a little bit interesting. Just because with gold, when we look at that durability, we can physically see that across time. That's why gold has the ultimate durability. Right? Again, that's why gold was chosen as money, because it has this ultimate durability. But it is
Mm-hmm.
something where Bitcoin can't stand up to that. Because conversation for a future future day,
Yeah.
because there is physical realities that do play into the security of Bitcoin, but
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin in and of itself is purely digital, and so you just can't get that physical durability that gold has. So it's really okay. So it gets to kind of this. All right, so fiat currency, we've got it. The durability is kind of dependent upon the institutions that are backing that. Bitcoin, it really depends on the network that's backing that to kind of assess the durability. And so what it gets back to then is this again argument for centralization versus decentralization, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
institutions that back fiat currency are centralized. Bitcoin is a decentralized network. So we really have to go back to this fundamental thing of what's better across time. Is it a decentralized system or is it a centralized system? And
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to kind of say, it's either or, so to say, but there's layers in between, right? Just because we
Mm-hmm.
could have Bitcoin at the fundamental layer be decentralized while having layers on top of Bitcoin. Again, conversation for another day, but have those be more centralized.
Yeah.
Neither here nor there. The principle is the same. Is that okay? The
Yeah.
network that backs Bitcoin, it contributes to its durability, and we have to understand that network to be able to start to understand the durability of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah. There's kind of twofold, I guess, when it comes to the durability of the Bitcoin network. It's one, can the code or the secure, the encryption algorithm backing it be hacked?
Yeah.
And then also, physically, then if you think about the durability of the network, do people even want to run miners, own Bitcoin and use it as money? And so
Mhm.
the network of people actually wanting to be a part of it is another aspect, which yeah, later conversation. But let's go to the last one then, scarcity, um, and talk through that. So why is scarcity important when it comes to money? What would you say?
Scarcity is important when it comes to money because our time is finite. And so, why would our money, which is again representation of our energy expended, why would that also not be
Mm-hmm.
finite or at least
Mm-hmm.
close to finite? Or
Yeah.
even if it's not finite, at least constrained by physical realities.
Yep.
That's ultimately what it gets to, right? And
Yeah. Let's speak to then. I don't want to necessarily go into the tie between scarcity and inflation, but I think what is an important story to tell, I guess, is I've heard stories about the rhinestones or something. I don't know if you know the full story about that, but we can tell it just in a different way. Um, you know, we inherently understand that one of one is more valuable than one of 100 million. Like we just kind of inherently know that if I have a one of one painting, it's probably going to be more valuable than, a one of 100 million paintings. Um, and so if we look at it just a small society and the amount of money that's in that society, let's say there's 10 people, this is the classic way to explain inflation, but it's also why scarcity is important. There's 10 people on an island. They're cut off from the rest of the world, let's say, and they have $10. We'll just use dollars. So let's say each of them has $1, all right, and that's what they use to transact on a daily basis in their economy. And then you and I show up on a big boat, and we have $100,000 all of a sudden. Now, their dollar that they used to have one of 10. and it worked. Now they have one of 100,010, and that makes their one worth a whole lot less than it was prior to us showing up on the boat out of thin air to them, with $100,000 of their money. And now we basically run that society, because we showed up. But that's why scarcity is important, because if somebody can just show up on your beach with 100,000 more of whatever you use for money, well, then that makes the portion that you have quite a bit less valuable, than it was just moments before us showing up.
And again, that's why it ties back to the energy expended in some way, right? Because okay, it's one thing to kind of theoretically say, okay, now I own one of 100,000 versus one of 100 or one of 10. Right? It's like, well, yeah, they brought more. That makes sense. Well, yes, but your one of 10, even if it wasn't equal, because most societies aren't,
Yeah.
that was still representative of the energy you expended to somehow acquire that, right? Again, but getting back to the barter, you're one of 10 cows. That was still, you had to do work in order to tend to that cow. If someone came in with 100,000 cattle, like, okay, well, your energy, without really you doing anything else, doing anything different, your energy and your time is now devalued because of that. And so that's the premise that is, so powerful with that, and understanding that, okay, yeah, we show up with a ship on the island, that $100,000, we might have actually worked less hard than the people that had the $1, right? It was just that our
Yeah.
society, for one, we somehow use the same money, which that's always the funny thing with that example is like, how does that happen? But neither here nor there.
Yeah.
You know, our society just might have had more for whatever reason. That doesn't necessarily make our time or energy more valuable than others, but that's exactly what happens, right? Is now, yeah, we rule that island because we have 100 times or whatever times more than the people that are there already. And so, yeah, when we
Yeah.
talk about scarcity across these assets, to get back to the point, gold it's scarce or scarce because it's kind of like the what's the I can't remember the word. Doesn't matter. Um, Gold is scarce insofar as it's a physical reality that we can only mine so much out of the earth. Like we don't know for sure, but there likely is a finite amount. Not likely. There is a finite amount of gold. Right now,
Yeah.
will we ever get to the point where there is literally no more gold? Who knows? Like mining practices just continue to get better and better and better. And so, for lack of better word, like it is infinite in some sense, but not really infinite. But no matter here or there, you have to work in order for that to come out of the ground. And then the existing gold that's in circulation, there's no other way that that's diluted. Again, because we get back to this verify or the fungibility part. Like, hey, we can kind of tell one ounce of gold is 1 ounce of gold. So that's what we, again, that's why gold was chosen, was for that, because we had to work to get that out. Bitcoin is the same thing. The work is different, but you still have to do work to put more Bitcoin into circulation. And in Bitcoin's case, there truly is a finite amount, and that there's only ever going to be 21 million. That's the difference between gold and Bitcoin. That's semantics that we can talk about on a different day. The premise of that there is some sort of finite amount or relatively finite amount, or at least the work has to be done to get the more money into the system. That's the premise that kind of puts those apart from what we see with fiat currency, which is that money can be created at will with no work done. Literally, a push of a button can create trillions of dollars. That's
Yeah.
what we saw during COVID. That's what we've seen during many of the financial crisis. That's what we saw during the 2001 tech bubble. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Is that the solution to the problems that are being created is just to create more money. And since it doesn't really matter that that's tied to any physical reality, we can now do that at will. And so
Yep.
now, instead of, at the very least, when we're sailing to the island where we have to work, now it's basically they're just literally helicoptering money down to us for no other reason, right? Like, okay, great, we're just sending money down just for fun. And so,
Well,
from this stage,
it's not even necessarily helicoptering and dropping off a big bag of money. It's, well, we can just do it for us, you and I. Like, let's say this society, yeah, somebody worked for 10 years to make that dollar or whatever. They built this incredible thing that helped their community so much, made their life so much better. You know, they spent time away from their family to build this thing, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you and I come in and it's just like we can snap our fingers and make the same amount or 10 times more in a matter of seconds. It's like, it doesn't matter what all the work that you put in. Like we're just going to make your work worth way less just because we feel like it, you know, or we can, is maybe the better way to put it.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
So that's the scarcity conversation. And then that's why, like you said, you know, Bitcoin is superior even to gold, because, you know, gold does require time, energy, resources to be able to extract it and get it out of the earth. But theoretically, you know, the constraints on that time, energy, and resources lead gold to only be, you know, the supply to only be expanded by a couple percent each year. And then Bitcoin, you know, it has its kind of issuance schedule over time, which we can get into later, but it will stop at 21 million eventually. Whereas the dollar that we have now, if the government feels like printing trillions and sending it to Ukraine, then they will print trillions and send it to Ukraine, making the last 5 years of your life that you just spent 40 hours per week working worth less immediately. And, you know, you have no choice whether you want that money to go to Ukraine or even come into existence in the first place. You don't have a choice. You can say all you want. You can vote for your, whatever. We won't get into that whole conversation, but they'll both do it. Doesn't matter who you vote for. It's not about that. Your vote does not matter. It will happen. Doesn't matter what you think, what you want to happen. You have no say in the matter, but your work will just be the value of the work that you put in for 5-10 years away from your kids will be worth half as much simply because, you know, they want to start some war in Russia and Ukraine, or, you know, whatever it may be. They want to fund some, never mind. I'm not going to go there. So let's kind of just do a rundown then. I told you this is going to be way longer than what you expected. But let's do a rundown of the 5 attributes then that make a good money for society. You know, we had portability. It's very important to be able to transport your money across space, if you will, across, you know, different distances easily and cheaply, which Bitcoin is superior to gold, way superior to gold in that way. It's superior to the dollar, even though, the dollar's entirely digital. There are authorities in place to prevent you from doing the things you may want to do. And those restrictions from those authorities can change at any point. And your money is no longer your money if they decide it's not. Bitcoin, however, you can transport it yourself very easily, or you can transport it by sending it to another person without anyone saying you can't, which is, so you have the ultimate economic freedom to be able to do what you want with your money. And then we have divisibility was the next one. Bitcoin is theoretically infinitely divisible, which doesn't ruin the value of it at all. You know, dollars, it's divisible. Cool. Gold, it was hard to divide. And then we have fungibility, which we spoke to, which is basically all the units are equal, so it allows us to trade back and forth without having to worry about, you know, my Bitcoin being different from yours, or my dollars being different from yours, or my gold being different from yours. We don't have to worry about that. And then we have the durability and scarcity. So we'll get into the durability of gold is lasts forever physically. You know, you can see it; it's still here from thousands of years ago. And even if you melt it down, try to change the form of it, whatever, it still holds its durability. And then we got into the conversation of Bitcoin and the US dollar, and the durability physically is good, but we talked about the durability of the kind of network, if you will, the durability of the institution being the US government backing the dollar, and then the durability of the network of Bitcoin, which we'll get into in further conversations about what could be a dangerous or a danger to the durability of Bitcoin and its value later on. But for now, so far over 15 years, it's been perfectly durable. No problems yet. And then we had scarcity, which we explained why that's important. And it's that one is very critical in a society. So to the final portion of this, and maybe we could break this up into two parts, just so I don't know why people do that, to be honest, on their podcasts. If you have part one, part two, it's like, well, I still got to listen to both of them to get through all of it anyways. But but yeah, so to finish this out, I think it's important to talk through the 3 stages that money goes through to ultimately become an everyday money that we use to go to the grocery store or whatever, buy a car or buy a house, or what it is today. There are clearly identifiable stages that a form of money must go through for it to be ultimately what we use on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is where we can really get into some of the, honestly, if we go for 2 hours, whatever, but we can get into some of the specific arguments against Bitcoin, because that's where we can really dive into this, because people, will say, yeah, I can't go to the grocery store and use it for very XYZ reasons. So first thing, we have the 5 properties of money, and now we decide, okay, yeah, that's great money, but it has to now go through the kind of these 3 stages to be a fully functioning value communication network, form of money, whatever you want to call it in our society. And the first is a store of value. So once we land on a resource, a good, being a good form of money based on those other properties, now it has to be able to store its value for it to be used for the other 2 functions later that we'll talk about. So if you could just maybe define in simple terms what store of value means for money and why it's important for money to be established as a store of value to be able to be used.
Yeah. And I even think it's good just to kind of lay the roadmap for where this is going, what this kind of evolution really means. And that is, we've got, those 3 stages are store of value, medium of exchange, and then unit of account. Store of value, again, it stores your value across time. We'll come back to that. Medium of exchange means that it can be used for exchange in goods and services, and a unit of account means that goods and services are priced in that store of value. That's kind of the roadmap of where we're going. But to talk specifically about the store of value thing is, yeah, again, this is where it gets to, and I think this is something I always had trouble with for a while in understanding kind of this development, is that, again, money is a good, and that good historically was chosen because of those attributes that we just talked about. Those attributes, all those attributes we just talked about, are what make that money a good store of value, right? And again, when we say store of value, what are we saying? Well, we're saying that store of value is your value, your time, your effort. That's what this gets to, right? Is we're storing those things. And so because that's what we're storing, that's where these attributes that we talk about come in to say, okay, yes, this is a good store of value, i.e. this is a good form of money to at least store my value. And why that's kind of hard to conceptualize sometimes is because that's not all what fiat money is. Fiat money is a decreed money, right? It's a decreed currency. It is something where a organization or an institution says, this is what we are going to use, and then they use something to enforce that. And that is where we're at now. Previously it used to be that, okay, money was, chosen, and then fiat currency kind of came out of this chosen good. But once you detach from that reality, once we detach from the physical reality of gold backing the fiat currency, then it really becomes a decreed money. And how do they enforce that decree? They enforce that through taxes, and they enforce that through their physical
Violence.
Yes, violence. Thank you. They enforce it through violence, through a military. And so that is, I think that's hard to kind of conceptualize with this, is that people are so used to just it being decreed and then being enforced various ways, versus how money came about originally was chosen, right? Money originally was a decentralized effort. Enough people chose a store of value that it became something that we used in exchange, right? It became something
Yeah.
that we used to buy and sell.
And they
Go ahead.
chose it. They chose it because it benefited the group as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I think it's obvious, but it's important. Like, why would you choose something? Because it benefits you. It's your best choice, you know, for your life. And if an entire world or country chooses the same thing, it's because it benefits the group the best as a whole.
Yeah. Yep. And this is where, this is what's interesting too, because, and we don't need to go too far down this. This is where it gets into the volatility aspect of Bitcoin too, right? One of the things that people say, oh, we can't use it as money. It's way too volatile. Well, the reason it's volatile is because it is still going through this evolutionary process of store value, right? It's still going through the process of more people adopting it as something they want to store their value in. And sure, like, you see these crazy wild swings on it, and that's not the only thing that contributes to those crazy wild swings. That's also just the fact that the money printer gets turned off at will or turned on at will, and Bitcoin is one of the first assets to kind of react to that. That aside, the other reason for that is because of the adoption aspect of it. And in really what you see is that, yeah, okay, there's these kind of adoption waves where, okay, more people, Bitcoin kind of has these crazy high prices. A bunch of people come in, they're like, cool, Bitcoin's the best thing ever, and I'm just going to get all these, crazy gains on it. I'm going to make a whole bunch of money, right? But the intent for most, go ahead.
Well, I love what you're saying, and the volatility. People will argue against Bitcoin for the volatility, but the volatility of the value of Bitcoin, if we were all truly just saying yes or no, is this a good form of money, would not be there. You know what I'm
Yeah, if
saying?
everybody was. But
Yeah, and
that's the
so
thing, not everybody.
everyone is still everyone is still, like you said, deciding on whether or not this is a good form of money. But that's actually not. I wouldn't even say that's really where we're at right now. Like, some people are the people who understand it to the fullest extent, but I would say most people are really just viewing this as a risky investment. That's what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they
Yeah.
choose to buy it, it's not necessarily I'm buying it as, oh, I'm buying this because it's a better form of money than my dollars. It's like, oh no, I'm just trying to make as many dollars as I can. And so when people they attack Bitcoin as money because of the volatility, it's actually more. I would argue probably more because it's not being viewed as money. It's being viewed as an investment. So, anyways, you may have been going there. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. Is that it's not just immediately obvious that this thing is money and that we should adopt it as money for multiple reasons. But once it does become obvious, that's where that store of value attributes increases over time. And so, yeah, this volatility isn't going to stop for many, many reasons, whether it's, because most people view it as a speculative asset, whether it's because, again, it's a function of the money coming into our system and that having an effect on that volatility across time. But theoretically, if Bitcoin really does mature over time and really does actually become a money that we can use globally, I mean, kind of evolves into these future steps that we'll get to, what you will theoretically see is that Bitcoin becomes less volatile over time. Because once you get into a critical mass of adoption on it, all of a sudden those new people come in, amount for less and less as a percent. And then again, as more people are adopting, that means less people are really using that other form of money. So, okay, who cares if the volatility, quote unquote, in US is still this crazy amount? If 80% of people are using Bitcoin as a money, they don't care about what it means in dollar terms. All they care about is what my Bitcoin buys me in Bitcoin terms. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of that evolution. And yeah, it's, part of the volatility in simplest terms is just that it's an early form of money, and we haven't seen a new form of money since gold, right? I mean, literally, fiat currency is just an extension of what gold is. And if you want to call fiat currency money, okay, then maybe that was an evolution in and of itself. But again, for the most part, fiat was just an extension of gold. So it's an extension of that as a money. And so when was gold? I don't know. Gold was adopted, I don't know, 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years ago. I don't know when it was, right?
Forever. I
Long
mean,
time ago. And so we
the
literally,
Bible mentions gold like in Genesis.
right. It's
So
just like, did we
literally forever.
always know? Right. Literally forever. And so that's where it gets to that interesting part of just when you really are thinking about that aspect of Bitcoin is that, well, yeah, it's probably going to be volatile because we haven't experienced what we're experiencing, maybe since at least the impetus of, modern humans, so to say, like what's recorded in the Bible. It's just, I don't know. It's fascinating to me to think about that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, just to tie this back into what we were talking about, we got into the volatility discussion and how everyone wants to say that that's an argument against Bitcoin. Is the store of value. So saying that Bitcoin is a store of value is essentially what we're saying is, or to for Bitcoin, for everyone to agree that Bitcoin is a store of value, it's going to go through that kind of rocky adoption phase. Like we're saying, it's going to be very up and down. But if you zoom out, Bitcoin has stored value very, very well from the beginning. If you put $1 into Bitcoin back in, I don't know, when it first started, I don't know what it would be worth now, but it would be worth way more than either of us even think, probably, or anyone listening even thinks. And so, yeah, okay, we have this short-term kind of volatility because people are trying to figure it out. Some people are viewing it as an investment. No one's really sure what to think about it yet. But that's like the first stage of something becoming an everyday form of money. Is it needs to store value well, and we essentially believe that Bitcoin will store value well because of the properties that we mentioned earlier. Bitcoin is superior in every single attribute. So we believe, okay, that it will be a really good store of value into the future because of that. And then once everyone is like, oh yeah, Bitcoin is a good store of value, then it can become a wider used medium of exchange, which people will say, oh, I can't go to the grocery store and use Bitcoin to buy, but you can use Bitcoin to buy a lot of things. Right now you could use Bitcoin to buy our service, for example, or Ben's Wine over in Peony, Colorado. Whatever. There are a lot of people who are accepting Bitcoin, and the infrastructure is there, I think, is the biggest point, to be able for you to go to the Vale Farmers Market and buy Ben's Wine right there on the spot. It's all in place, just most people don't realize it yet.
And again, it's just another adoption curve. And I think what this really gets back to, I think probably the broad term to describe this kind of process is the network effects of money, right? So, you kind of already listed, like, okay, because and even to try not to go too many different directions here. Whole adoption.
We'll tie up all the loose ends in future episodes, but I think it's for anyone who is listening to hopefully all the way through here. I think it'll be cool for them to just hear us think through it kind of in real time and communicate it, because there is so many levels to this that we'll make clear in the future if you're still
hole.
Yeah, I mean, if you're still
hole.
Yeah.
Like what I was getting there, I think it is two good points. And basically one of them is that it is important to understand that Bitcoin depends on adoption. Like at a fundamental level, it does depend on adoption. And so that is a risk to Bitcoin, right? That's kind of what you're explaining, is that, well, Bitcoin, the reason we can be kind of certain of this stored value is because it has these certain attributes. But that is still dependent on adoption from people, understanding those attributes, and maybe not even at the level that we did, but in some sort of theoretical level, understanding that. understanding it, and then making the choice then to adopt Bitcoin. So that is one of the biggest risks to Bitcoin, is that just peters out, and then enough people actually don't come to understand that. And so, okay, and I'm not saying that means Bitcoin goes to zero per se, but it does mean that, okay, maybe it's limited in its use. And you could even say that, well, just, this is a meme in Bitcoin, just zoom out, right? Well, over a longer time period, yeah, maybe it's not this generation, but it's 3 generations from now where it has, kind of got that fully broad adoption, so to say. But that is, I think that's something we need to highlight, is the risk is that, well, it's based on adoption. But again, where I come back to that is, okay, the network effects of money. And so again, basically what network effects are is it tries to describe the value of any given network as the amount of people in that network grow. So how do the amount of people in a network affect the value of a network? And so I think the easiest way to think about this is social media. Okay, why is Facebook, even after all these years and all these things that people talk, bad about them, for the most part, it's still the most dominant social media network, right? It's because of the network effects. It's because there is, I don't know how many users Facebook has now, like literally half the planet, maybe 2/3 of it. I don't know. But it's more than any other social media. So the value of Facebook as a network is exponentially more than every other social media. And that's why it's so hard for any sort of new social media to really come in and try and do that, because it has to overcome that. It has to overcome that there's 5 billion users or whatever it is of Facebook. And so it's the same thing with Bitcoin. Again, social media is just like a social. Go ahead.
One different perspective that will help that kind of sink in what you're saying is, imagine I was the only one using Facebook. How valuable would it be? It wouldn't be valuable at all. I would be on there just like looking at my own posts, and that'd be it. There would be no reason for me to even want to use it, And then, okay, let's say I got you to come on. Okay, cool. Now you and me can look at each other's posts and send each other our own memes and our own messages back and forth. And it's like, okay, it's still not valuable to our neighbor. Like, they probably don't care, unless we're friends with them, that we're just like bullshitting back and forth on Facebook. But when there's billions, like you're saying, all of a sudden now it makes sense for the next person to join, because there's billions of people on there, or even like for us to advertise on the platform or whatever. It's like, it makes the network so valuable. Like, oh yeah, I should put content on there because there's already billions of people there. I just need to go where they already are. So,
yep, right.
I like thinking of things. I just like thinking of things in like small terms. It helps to just make it very clear to me. Like, if I was the only one using it, nobody else would care to use it. That's for sure.
Yep. And I think too, this is where, again, we started with money is a communications network, right? That is what money is. It's communicating value. That is the communication network of money. And so this is why we can apply that network effect framework on Bitcoin as a money and say, this is the network. The network is a values communication network. And then say, okay, well, then does this money, is it a good form of money? Yes or no? Yes, Bitcoin is a good form of money, arguably the best form of money that we have available to us right now. Okay, if that is true, what we see is that adoption is growing, right? Which it has. That's what's organically happened, and we can have an assumption about that continuing to increase or continuing to happen in the future. Which, again, getting back to, if Bitcoin is a better form of money, we can have a reasonable assumption that that's probably going to happen. That's where, again, it begins this kind of snowball effect of, why do we want to own Bitcoin? It's because of that. Yeah. It's because it's a better form of money than what we have now. Because it's a better form of money, that means more people are likely to adopt it, not guaranteed, but likely. As more people adopt it, the value of that network gets exponentially more valuable. This is also a reason why people will say, hey, well, why not own Ethereum or own another network? That's a multifaceted answer, but at a very high level, that is the best answer for it. Is that for that network to overcome Bitcoin, the network effects of of the Bitcoin monetary network is a huge hurdle now. That I think that is the bullish case for Bitcoin, for where it's at in its adoption cycle now versus, say, even 4 years ago, certainly 8, and certainly at inception, is that there is a hurdle rate now. There is a hurdle that any other network has to overcome. Can that happen? Maybe theoretically. The likelihood every year that Bitcoin continues to grow gets lower and
Yeah.
lower and lower. And here's the cool thing about Bitcoin too, not to get too technical, but we can actually estimate adoption, because we can actually, again, Bitcoin is a public ledger. For another episode, Bitcoin is public. Because of that, we can see all the information. So we can actually see the amount of users on the platform. And it's not, a one for one, but we can get rough estimates of it via being able to see
Yeah.
things that are happening on the blockchain. So it's not just like, I'm talking with more people, so I get a sense that it's, going better, and I'm kind of in my echo chamber, and I'm more people in my echo chamber are talking about it, more people in my community. No, we can go on the blockchain and verifiably say, yeah, the number of addresses is continuing to grow over time. Okay, good. Now we know that likely that means that adoption is growing, because the number of address, normally one address or two addresses, is tied to one person. So if we can see that that is growing, that means that we have a reasonable assumption to say that adoption is growing over time. So again, this ties back in with this store of value, is that, okay, if Bitcoin can be a good store of value, and that is the first way that money develops, and we have a reasonable assumption that that's going to continue because it's going to stay a good form of money, which again, this is where it gets back to this decentralized versus centralized aspect. The reason that we can have a reasonable expectation for Bitcoin to stay the same into the future is because in order to change Bitcoin, almost everybody in the network has to agree to change it, versus some centralized organization or institution making the change itself. So we have a reasonable expectation that Bitcoin is going to stay the same, all that other sort of stuff. This is where, again, those network effects just continue to multiply and multiply and multiply. And why specifically right now, we've kind of, you can almost say, like, you look at those adoption curves, the S curves, right, for like social media or TVs or computers, where it's, nothing, crazy high, and then nothing once it's reached mass adoption. You could say that we've kind of left those early stages with Bitcoin, and we could very well be getting into the steep parts of the S curve as far as adoption goes.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was brilliant.
I know you'll appreciate this. It made me think of Shroot Bucks.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's the network effects of Shroot Bucks? Tell me.
That's why Shroot
Bucks office fans.
That's why Shroot Bucks has no value. Oh man, Shroot Bucks. Anyways, yes, and so eventually, what we're saying is that the infrastructure is there for Bitcoin to be a medium of exchange, meaning you go to the grocery store, buy your groceries. It's just a matter of the adoption, like you're saying, getting to this kind of critical scale where the grocery store agrees, we agree, the maintenance man, that's going to fix my car, agrees, that, yeah, this is something that I am willing to give you my service or my product in exchange for. So it's not a matter of Bitcoin's capability to do it. It's really more of, I guess we could get into the capability as far as speed of transactions and all that, but as of now, the capability is there. It's just a matter of all of the various parties agreeing that they're willing to sell their stuff for it. And so
that's
we'll see.
That's an adoption curve in and of itself. So it's like, first it's got to have this adoption curve of unit of account. Later to that, there's this medium exchange. We actually want to exchange it, as you laid out. Like, I can actually go and buy goods and services. You want to see an example of this? Go look at the Oshi app, OSHI. Look up Oshi app. There's not a whole bunch, but there is enough service providers on there. You can buy. You can get meat from somewhere. You can get accounting services. You can get soap. You can get, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff on there, right? So it's not that this isn't available right now. It is. It's still a microcosm. But again, that's because that adoption curve is delayed compared to the store of value adoption curve. But they do, as more people adopt the money as a store of value, then if I'm already holding this money, then it just makes sense to use it in exchange. Why would I convert to dollars when I don't need to? Why would I, instead of just sending from one Bitcoin wallet to another, why not just, instead of selling to my bank account, then transferring, using my credit card and then paying off my credit card bill. And then, okay, that person getting it, just, okay, me transfer money from one person to another. Why not just do that? Right. That's the
Yep.
delay in the medium of exchange. It's there. And I don't think we need to get into the whole, I think that's probably a future conversation, because there is the whole, well, Bitcoin can only have so many transactions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
We leave it at Bitcoin can only have so many transactions on the base layer, just like Fedwire can only have so many transactions on their base layer. You ain't using Fedwire to go and buy your groceries at the grocery store, right? You're
Totally.
using a credit card settlement network, right? That is
Yeah.
a third layer on top of what is the base layer. And so
Yeah.
that's what Bitcoin has, these same layers that allow for these faster transactions on top. Now, there's a whole bunch of trade-offs to that. Leave it at that for now. But needless to
Right.
say, the infrastructure for medium of exchange, even at the everyday level, is there. It's continuing to get better and better every single day. And again, another delayed adoption curve then on medium of exchange is once enough people are using it to buy goods and services, just like it then just makes sense to just exchange back and forth. Well, then it's like, well, why are we even using dollars for our unit, right? Why are we pricing
Yeah.
things at $500 when we can just say that's 0.0001 Bitcoin instead?
Yeah.
That is the delayed mechanism. So yeah, you can't go to the grocery store to buy it. That's fine. You actually probably don't want Bitcoin to be that right now, because if Bitcoin would be right now, then that means that
Yeah.
Bitcoin adoption is done, right? We
Done.
are
Yeah.
done basically adopting it. And so it's like, yeah, we don't really want it to be a medium of exchange right now. And maybe we don't ever, right? Like that's a reality I think not enough people talk about, is that, maybe we don't actually ever want to use Bitcoin. Maybe we just want to stay using dollars and have Bitcoin be the money that backs those dollars, just because the
Yeah.
infrastructure to use dollars every day is already there. Like that could be a reality. It still doesn't negate Bitcoin's ability to be a store of value and to be
Yeah.
valuable and to increase our value over time.
Right.
And so, that.
That's yeah. That's what I tell a lot of people that just in or I even do another podcast when people ask like Bitcoin doesn't have to be something that you actually go to the grocery store and use to buy your groceries with for it to be valuable.
Mhm.
Because of what we've already mentioned before, because of the properties. It still has those properties, regardless if I can go to Kroger and buy my groceries. It still allows me to transfer money across space, meaning just to someone else in my town or maybe in a different country or whatever, without anyone interfering with that.
Mhm.
And I can confidently rely on it being scarce, which we already kind of went over why that's important. And so if I can, even if they continue to, or we continue to use dollars on an everyday basis, well, in the intermediate term, okay, I may get paid in dollars. And then if I need to go to the grocery store right then, I can just keep part of my money in dollars. But if I don't necessarily need it in the next few days, I can
Mhm.
put it into Bitcoin and it will store the value, over
Mhm.
time. And if that's it, then as they continue to print more and more dollars and more people agree, oh, I'll just kind of store this for the medium and long term here in Bitcoin. Well, it will still go up in value or in price in dollar terms. So yeah, I think
This
that's
is
a
why this is why I get to, if you want to know if a country is actually friendly to Bitcoin or bullish on Bitcoin, if they I think the biggest way to know if that's happening is if there is an exception. You basically, um, what's the way to put it? You don't have to pay taxes on any gains or losses with Bitcoin if the transaction is under like 500 or $1,000. That's the best way to know, because then what that allows is for instantaneous conversion of Bitcoin into dollars to pay for goods and services and not having to worry
mm-hmm.
about the tax consequences for it. So if a
Yeah.
country, or there's legislation that is put in law that says, yeah, you don't have to pay taxes on anything less than $1,000 in Bitcoin, that's how you know that a Bitcoin is actually, or a country is actually very friendly, or a jurisdiction is actually very friendly to Bitcoin. Because okay,
Mm-hmm.
now you can, like, yes, the actual exchange is still in dollars or whatever local currency, but you're holding Bitcoin before, it's only converted to use at that time. And then, I mean, ideally, that whoever buying goods and services from, is then instantly converting that back into Bitcoin. It's just using the dollar rails to basically, because they're more efficient right now, to get money across. But it starts in Bitcoin and theoretically can end in Bitcoin. And even if it doesn't end in Bitcoin, you as the consumer of that product, it can still just be, I hold Bitcoin until I don't need it. And there's not
Yeah.
anything you need to do other than, okay, I swipe my credit card and my debit card or whatever, and instantaneously my Bitcoin is then sold to dollars to fund that, and I don't have any tax consequence of doing that because it's less than 500, 1,000, whatever it's going to be dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that was a good foundational conversation for what we'll get into in the future, but it's important to just understand, to kind of tie this all back, put a bow on it, if you will. It's just important to understand the purpose that money serves in a society, and how when you have a bad form of money, it can cause problems for you individually, also for society as a whole. And so now, someone who listened all the way through here, you can actually take a more objective view on, are dollars a good form of money? Is Bitcoin a good form of money? Is gold a good form of money? And you can apply these same principles to any other good that you want. You could look at apples, or all these other things that we've kind of alluded to, raspberries, shroot bucks, whatever. Like, you can now make your own decision on what is a good form of money just by taking these properties, understanding the functions that money serves with store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account, and the properties that we mentioned earlier, which are portability, divisibility, fungibility, durability, and scarcity. We can get into, maybe verifiability or some others later, but those kind of basic foundational properties, just compare whatever you're looking at to those, and you'll be able to know, is this a good form of money or not? And so what we've done now is kind of equipped you with the knowledge to be able to look at anything that could be money and make your own decision on what you think. It's not the government saying, hey, this is what money's going to be, don't care what you think. It's, well, no, here's how to actually know if something is a good form of money or not. And just the foundation of how we come to even land on Bitcoin in the first place, of like, oh, wait, like, this is a good form of money. And then you have to go down deeper to understand, the more maybe technical aspects of Bitcoin, and why it could work. So anyways, if anyone listens to this whole thing, I'm shocked. I'm so thankful for you. Hopefully this is like still up like 10 years from now. And so maybe you're in like 2034 and you're listening to this all the way through. Just let me know if you did, because that would be super cool. It'd be like time traveling in kind of a way, and be like, hey, like, I get a DM in 2034 that someone listened to my words right here in 2024. That'd be cool. Anyways,
And
now
for that person, if you're listening to this in 2034 and you haven't got any Bitcoin yet, and Bitcoin's still around, now's the time, bud.
now's the time. Now's the time. Yeah, for sure. And if you're thinking about working with us in 2034, I doubt we're
Hopefully
taking
we're
on.
full up and you can.
Yeah, I doubt we're taking on new clients, but if you have enough money, then money talks. So, or by that time, if you have enough Bitcoin, well, that kind of is how it is right now, how we make that decision. But anyways, thank you for spending your hour and however long this ends up being after I edited it down with us. We know your time is valuable, and your money should be valuable as well. So thank you, and we will see you in the next episodes, where we'll continue to dive deeper into this Bitcoin topic, getting into the serious risks to Bitcoin, the threats, what could actually destroy it and make it worthless. We'll be honest with you about that. Also maybe how to custody your Bitcoin. We'll definitely go through how to think about it in your overall financial plan, financial situation. definitely will discuss that, how to think about it from a investment portfolio perspective, allocation perspective, all of these different things that you're probably wondering if you've come to listen. So we'll get into that. Thank you for listening all the way through, and talk soon. Yeah.
Gonna have to
Stop.
edit out all this.
Stop.
What if it didn't record that whole time?